it's like we're in business to make money. If we're doing things that don't make money, why are we doing them? And I have a feeling this is where this conversation is going to be going.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of it, and I think in this case, the sensitivity comes from our point of contact gets it logically. This person isn't as emotionally tied to the revenue, the legacy of the client.
Right.
When the moment comes, if the right answer is we've got to eject this client, that's where that is pretty well predicted that's where that the owner who's tries to remove himself from the business is gonna really start saying, yeah, but that's ABC company, and yeah, they're good enough, and look, we got these 2 other clients because of our relationship with them. All the good basic logic, but
Yeah.
that's where the puck is heading right now. All right, welcome back to another episode of the BMK Vision podcast. We got a banger for us this time. All right, this is a real-time one from a real client, awesome company, but they're falling into a trap. And the trap is, I've got a few low margin MSP contracts that I know aren't profitable, but I'm so addicted. Now they won't say that part, to the ego push I get from the revenue. So the right answer being likely that we need to shed that client, but that hit on the top line revenue is too much. Now, I can't really relate to that. Like, that's just not me. I mean, I would never do that. So you guys will have to carry the water on this one because it just doesn't even make sense. But clearly that is not true. This is something I fall into myself, but I don't know, guys. I think this is pretty clear. You've seen this before. You've experienced this before.
I've
For sure.
experienced it for sure.
Yeah, not just with working with us, right, Gary? I hope.
Oh, personally, professionally,
Okay.
at home, all types of ways.
That's right. Absolutely. And Ryan, you always had such a solid model. It's hard to find yourself in this trap when you were running primarily on the hourly side.
So you still can find yourself in that trap. Okay. I had this one client that we tried so hard to work with. And what I found was they can suck revenue in interesting ways. Okay. I know what you're talking about is very much like their agreement, and that's what we're going to get into. But I remember 1 week, she took up my bookkeeper's time for the entire week because she kept questioning every little thing on the invoice. And like, we already had given her a good deal on her invoice. And so like, we kind of have to look at the total cost of ownership of a client here.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I wasn't even considering that, but that's so true. And I think everyone has a right to question the bill, but man, sometimes people weaponize what seems innocent into, I'm going to be so difficult that you're eventually going to concede to me, or I'm going to slow your payment so long that you're going to
Yes.
give up. Yeah, fair point. So let's kind of think about this particular client. I think they're in that kind of $7-8 million range, so very healthy. Couple of monster clients, brands that you would love, in out in the world. So it's real sexy. Those big, sexy clients for them are profitable. They're great. It's a few of these mid-range contracts, maybe in that $5,000 a month range, where it's a sexy number. When most of our contracts are in the 2,500, 3,000, those 5,000s, you're stoked for them. So pretty good size, pretty healthy ego on ownership, right? They're nice people, great people, but they're very proud of themselves, as they should be, but they'll let you know they're proud of themselves. So any challenge to, looking at let me back up a little bit. How we found this problem was perpetual service salaries to service revenue ratio being like literally 10 points high, 9 to 10 points high for a year. And thus service department gross profit in really bad shape. Now for them, it can get masked in the fact that they hit that 42% gross profit. They make that through amazing margin, making on product and resold cloud stuff, but and it's a big volume of their business, but that service gross profit is so low that they're leaving money and profit on the table. So that's how we got there. And as we've kind of danced around all the other things like time entry, pull through rate on hourly and projects up to the recurring, going every angle we can, we're finally here where it's let's really study these agreements. And their initiative right now is find those, any contract that's less than 40% gross profit, and that was generous, by the way. Um, we got to study those and figure out, is it us, them, what combination, which weighting factor, and that's where we're at today. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Can I ask a couple questions first? Can you give
As
us a feel for how how big of a problem? I always is this a $5 problem, a $5,000 problem, a $500,000 problem, right? So percentage wise,
so if I'm answering your question correctly, what I would say is, a lot of these are $5,000 contracts. So if we're
okay,
looking at $60,000 a year contract being 15, 20, 25 points low,
right?
what's that going to be? 15,000 multiplied by 5, 6 clients. That
Okay,
starts getting into some real dollars.
yeah,
So
okay,
of their portfolio, the 40% and belows make up probably 15, 20% of the contracts.
okay.
Right.
So it sounds like we're identifying it kind of at a good time. It's not like, oh my goodness, we're probably going to go out of business tomorrow because of this. Um, and I always like to frame that in my mind so that like, do we need to go straight for the tourniquet or like, do we have some runway? It sounds like we have some runway here.
We have some runway because that gross profit has remained healthy. Like this is not too ironically, even with those terrible service gross profit numbers, if they were a $2 million company, that would bury them. At
Yeah,
their size, there's enough cash flow, there's enough
yeah,
maturity that you're just really leaving profit on the table.
gotcha.
Okay, great call out there. So yeah, there's runway, but we've chewed up, a year of runway because we've been
Right.
aware of those poor P&L numbers for a year now.
Is this showing up in their bottom line?
So I could argue that it's not because that gross profit lands, at almost exactly 42% and they controlled G&A and sales expenses pretty well, right? It really shows up in that, leaving profit on the table in their case, which is rare. Normally this would show up on the bottom line for sure.
Yeah. So the urgency to solve this problem for them, is it high or low at this point?
It's getting higher. So without sharing, oversharing the details, you've got an owner who's awesome. His partner I haven't met, but I think that's a really cool guy. They've recently handed the reins over to a senior individual who's really, really just thorough, diligent, awesome, but still maturing in understanding the dynamics of the P&L and L and how it plays with the operational numbers in their PSA. So he's still developing, but he gets it. And so now, because he likes to win, he's like, I got to solve this, right? Before it was, hey, everything is fine. We'll worry about it later. Now he's got this, hyper competitiveness in his head saying, I want to solve this problem.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Ryan.
So I'm thinking, I'm like, so it sounds like the hyper competitiveness is one of the things I was looking for. Pain drives change. Okay. And sometimes these numbers when they get mixed in, but it sounds like we've got an individual at least that's willing to like really dig into this with you. So that's good.
Right.
Um, so it always amazes me sometimes that we even have to have these conversations. Um, this is and I'm guilty of this too. It's like we're in business to make money.
Mhm.
If we're doing things that don't make money, why are we doing them? And I have a feeling this is where this conversation is going to be going.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of it, and I think In this case, the sensitivity comes from our point of contact gets it logically.
Mhm.
This person isn't as emotionally tied to the revenue, the legacy of the client.
Right.
When the moment comes, if the right answer is we've got to eject this client, that's where that is pretty well predicted, that that's where that the owner who's, tries to remove himself from the business is going to really start saying, yeah, but that's ABC company, and yeah, they're good enough, and look, we got these two other clients because of our relationship with them. All the, good basic logic, but
Yeah.
that's where the puck is heading right now.
Well, if they have that good of a relationship with the client, they're getting referrals, things along those lines. My experience has been these are typically legacy clients, like you've had them for a while,
Yeah.
and you just haven't like they still have the friends and family discount, right?
Right.
But your operations matured, your costs have gone up. You just haven't passed that along as much to them. I was guilty of this too. This is why I'm a huge fan of 5% every year in the contract. It just automatically happens every January. Like, we don't
Right.
even have to have this conversation. Like, it's just gonna happen. Okay.
Right.
Um, I remember around COVID time, we we had everybody was like freezing prices. And then after COVID, I didn't adjust quick enough and I needed to raise hourly rates because we were more of an hourly shop. And I remember the moment that helped me get over this exact thing inside my company is I called one of my clients, and it was they're a friend, they're a client first in this case, and I said, I need to talk to you. Like I don't want to raise my prices here, but I have to." Um, and it was almost like I got her buy-in to do, and at the end of the day, she runs a company too. She was going through the same pressures that I was,
Mhm.
and she's like, "Fine. It's fine. Just do it."
Right.
Like that's all she said.
Right.
And for some reason, I kind of needed that mental permission slip to be like, "Okay, I can adjust things." And then life just got better because then I was able to go and have a more professional talk with some of my other clients and said like, "Look, here's where things are at. Here's where I'm at. You guys love us. It's not a huge increase. This is what I've got to do."
Right.
And honestly, not one of them left. Because I know a lot of the owners out there are fearing exactly that, like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna lose all my c." No, you're not.
Right.
No, you're not.
Right. Gary, what do you think about
Josh,
that? I think you're
y-
onto
y- y-
something.
yeah, I think that's right. I think I went through the same thing. I went through a rebrand of my entire business in like 20, what was it, like 2018.
Yeah.
Renamed the company, did all the branding. And really what that mostly was for is to kind of create a different aura around the company, be able to charge what I knew was the right rates, give a compelling reason for why we exist, which was really helpful. Not I do not recommend it if people love their brand to just rebrand, but I wasn't in love with it. But through that process, also did a price increase, and I reintroduced the company to all of our clients, and I knew I was underpriced, and I knew we were just hitting the ceiling of we can't afford more techs because we weren't charging enough, and we weren't
Right.
charging enough because we were afraid the clients were going to leave. But we didn't adjust our service according to how much we bill them because we want to provide the best service. Right. So then you just get stuck in this spot where it's like you're providing as if you're, a top tier MSP, but, um, you're not necessarily charging for that. So those two don't reconcile. Um, so when I went through all my clients, I picked my best relationships first and said, "Hey, look, I messed up. I charge you something that's not sustainable. I literally cannot continue through my business progression
Mhm.
without raising your price." And sometimes it was like over 100% increase
Wow.
per user at that point.
Mm.
Um, and every single one of them said yes. Some weren't necessarily too happy, mainly
Right.
because of the percentage of increase,
Right.
but they all stuck with us because we were always anchored in on giving the best service regardless of what we were charging.
Right.
And I think that's a lot of what MSPs do. A lot of the
Yeah.
ones I talk to, they're just like anchored in, we have to provide the best service. I've got to expect the most out of all my technicians, regardless of what I pay them. They've got to be at a high level, and their insecurities sit on that more than anything. Of they're not providing the the best, so they kind of anchor in on, I can't charge more because my guys aren't good enough, or my guys aren't
Uh,
providing the best type of services, and that relationship really gets you stuck.
Mhm.
right.
So
Right.
I personally went through this. Um, as we increased the price, I could pay my guys more. I can onboard more techs. The service got better because of that. We had more capacity. And that's really kind of the internal engine that you need
Right.
to, continue to provide the high level of service. So
That's really well said. And it makes me question a piece of my story with the clients to a degree. Once we identify a low margin agreement, we've got two sides of the equation, the revenue and the costs. And I think the natural instinct to say we're not charging enough. Now, that's a lot of times where it ends up, right? Like, that's just kind of the truth. What it takes to serve the client, whatever you've been taking time-wise to serve them, that's probably the right amount of time. But I feel like, and I want you to disagree if you disagree, diligence still needs to be made to say, how are we showing up? Are we putting our most expensive person on them all the time because that's that tech's favorite client or that client's favorite tech? Are we doing good, mature ticket handling? Are we doing root cause analysis to find, why we're having repetitive issues with a client driving up the time? What do you and that's my story. That's a couple weeks of work to do to kind of validate. Am I just prolonging the inevitable answer if you got to charge more?
I think when you're priced properly, you can look at those items that you listed more honestly.
Right.
I think what happens is when you're priced improperly, mainly from the to the downside, right?
Mhm.
You're underpricing. Everything looks like it's not working right.
Mhm.
You're constantly saying this, I need to make my team more efficient.
Mm,
So I'm going to onboard this tool set to help with that process. I'm going to lean on my dispatcher hard to be more critical on the time entries and I'm going to make sure my techs don't waste time out there doing the wrong thing. Um, all of those are true, but you're marrying that against this target price that's too low. So
Mhm.
regardless of what you actually can do to
Right.
improve, it
mhm,
generally just doesn't get to the level that you need to be. Now, if you're priced a little bit below, let's say like 10% below where you should be, sure, that's okay. But often what we find is like, if the going rate, the effective hourly rate that we're targeting is, $250 an hour, and we're coming in at like 125, 100, you're just not gonna efficiency your way through that
Right.
process. Like, it's just there's nothing you can do to get double the price for that hour of work.
right,
Um, it's just not gonna happen, and that's really where you get stuck is like, I can't make my guys better, and I can't afford to get better guys, and the customer won't pay more because we're not doing a good enough job. So you just get stuck in that kind of band of like, you know, really the unlock is ultimately just charge the right price and then things kind of flow up from there.
right.
You know what would be interesting, Josh? If there were like metrics that one could look at their business and gauge against to see if their team was being efficient and then arrive at that price.
Well, there are, right? Ironic or coincidentally. Here's the challenge with those metrics, though, Ryan, and I'll go a little deeper, and you guys kind of fact check me on this. There's, the obvious is utilization. All right, cool. We're everyone's 75%. Okay, but are we taking the right amount of time to do things, right? The real trick comes into this. I don't think anyone's great at this today. If you are, leave a comment, give us a holler of really studying that type subtype item on the ticket to
Mm.
say what are the issues we're spending time on? Do I actually look at this and can I diagnose or prescribe a solution based on that? So that's the story of efficiency to me, is saying how long are things taking and what issues should take, as what's an appropriate amount of time to solve the types of issues or the subtypes or items of issues. That level of diagnosis is just kind of beyond us at this stage as MSPs, most of us, I should say. But you're right, look at the obvious first, for sure.
Right. Well, one of the ways, let's talk real briefly, type, subtype, stuff like that.
Mm,
One of the ways that I showed the value of that to my team was from the sales metric.
mm,
Okay. Salespeople would love to go buy databases of contacts and things like that. Like, why don't we just mine the data that we have?
mhm,
Okay. And so if I'm seeing network switch tickets
mhm,
constantly from this one client, like, go make money.
mhm,
That's a sales opportunity right there. And it was interesting putting that lens on it versus I never had a really good luck with the techs looking at things proactively. Like
mhm.
that never clicked inside my organization. But man, my salespeople were hungry
And
and
that,
they would look at it.
yeah.
So just a kind of sidebar there.
I think that's relevant. I think that's relevant. So let's kind of check one box here. If your agreements are less than 40% gross profit for a long enough measured period of time, more than a quarter, probably 2 quarters, likely you're not priced correctly. Answer is go increase the price. Okay. If you're, 5 points under, hey, there might be some fine tuning of how you're serving that client. But once you get into that band of, you know, if the target's 65, once you're below 50%, if I'm taking Gary's message accurately, it's you're not going to operationalize yourself out of that.
Yeah.
There's you're too upside down. All right. Did I am I taking that correctly, Gary?
I think you're right, and just so kind of people can make make this make sense in their head. Um, you got to start with like, what is the price you charge?
Mhm,
Like I was just working with one of our clients yesterday, and he's small, and he's trying to figure it out. Like, we're going through, okay, what do we charge? Do we charge per user? He's got a lot of different contracts. Some are like infrastructure. He's got some staff fog. He's got a lot of different things going on. And he was really stuck on like the per user price. And he hasn't really charged that yet with any of them. He's kind of gotten to it in a certain way, but he hasn't really established like, I'm charging $200 a user and here's what it includes. And when I said 200, he was like, man, I don't know. That's like the premium like out here, and I don't feel like our guys are good enough. Or whatever kind of his hang up really was there. I think that's kind of what he's thinking. And what I think all business owners need to understand is like, you should have an established, like, this is our rate, our price. So when you look at these contracts, you can look at it fairly and say, oh, okay, this is our target, and this is how much per user, whatever, however you kind of increment your billing on. And then, when we look at it, we can say, oh, okay, yeah, and that's why we're getting this agreement gross profit. When you have different types of contracts, that gross profitability shows up in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons.
mhm.
And it's very difficult to dissect that. So standardizing on your pricing is kind of step one when you're thinking about how to objectively look at these issues.
Right,
So if you can't do that, you're going to run into bigger problems because you're including things in some contracts, you're not including things in others. You have a staff log over here that affects the gross profit in a way that is not totally fair. So I think just that's my first step is like, can we clearly state what we're charging for our contracts? And is that consistent across a larger set of the contracts?
right. Yeah, no, that sounds so obvious. And it as you were talking, I was just kind of playing the movie in my head of different clients and the really mature ones that, just kind of consistently kill it. If I called them or a salesperson just out of the blue and said, "Hey, what do we charge for our offering?" that number would be straight out the bat. And if I said, show me the last 10 proposals, I would see that number, like just dead on. I don't think that's the case for most people. I think, sometimes they casually or flippantly say, what do you charge? Well, as much as I can with any given client. I mean, I've heard that more than once, right? So it's like, all right, that's cute. That's fine. Does that also mean you charge as little as you have to when you feel like you have to? Likely true
Mhm.
as well. So
Yeah.
so let's now kind of move ourselves forward and say they didn't have a great experience like Ryan did with going and saying we got to raise your rates.
Right.
Maybe they're the clients just can't afford it. They're mad. Whatever the scenario is, you find yourself with five clients paying 5,000 a month each, and they all just say no, nope, can't do it, won't do it. Well, that's $25,000 a month. All right, and what does that equal? If we say a great engineer, a good solid engineer is $80,000 a year, call it 100 with taxes. What's that? $8,500 a month. If the profitability of those contracts is what's dragging down your service salary to service revenue ratio, that first step of saying I'm willing to reduce my revenue, well, it only happens the only way that makes sense is if you're gonna increase your profit, and you gotta go to the other side of the equation and say, that frees up 2 techs.
We'll be right back with more. But first, here's a quick message from Bering McKinley.
Most MSPs are constantly busy, chasing tickets, projects, and fires. But without structure, it's hard to know if the business is really improving. Vision from Bering McKinley is the system that helps you work on your business, not just in it. It connects leadership strategy with daily execution. Vision aligns people, process, and performance, creating clarity and rhythm from goals to results. And the Vision app brings that structure to life, helping you create policies, track goals, review KPIs, and collaborate with your BMK consultant all in one place. Behind it all, Jetson AI, your assistant inside Vision, helps you find answers, generate insights, and take action faster. With Vision, you gain visibility, accountability, and measurable growth. You're not guessing, you're improving. Vision, Jetson, and the Vision app, your path from strategy to results. Start transforming your business today.
All right, let's get back to the conversation.
Mhm.
And if I can get rid of that tech salary and I get rid of that revenue, equilibrium can be found, and we'll see an increase in profit. First of all, fact check me, guys. Did that make sense?
I think it does, and I think that it also you can look at it as I can get rid of this technician's wage,
Mm,
or you can also look at it as look at the capacity that I can build a sales initiative around. Okay.
okay. That's a
And
trap.
then what's that?
Debate on me with this. I say that's a trap.
It's a trap. Okay. Why do you say it's a trap?
If my sales are not active enough, I'm gonna fall into that trap of saying, "I've lost the revenue, I'm gonna hang on to the wage in the hope or prediction that I'm gonna replace that revenue with better revenue." How quickly can I do that?
Okay.
Can I outpace my low gross profit?
And the interesting thing is this is something that you and I, even when I was in business, never completely saw eye to eye on.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah,
Because you would be like, get rid of that expense. And I'd be like, but it's Mike, right?
right,
Like, I'm
right.
not
Shout
just
out
going to
to
get
Mike, by the way. I never said fire you, Mike.
no, he never said pirate. Mike's just the one that I always use for
That's
examples.
right.
Um, I think this is for me where it came down to my personality,
Mhm,
and I used that as a double down on the effort to
mm,
get out there and to make those sales. And since I was digging myself out of this like hole, if you will, of profitability, I was like, I have to be charging this. I have to get out there with this. And because I saw it as my responsibility to my team members to bring in that revenue and to we're the bus drivers, right? We
Uh-huh.
had to swerve a pothole. That's all we
Uh-huh.
did. Okay. The company's not bad. The company's not broken. We swerved. And if somebody goes to fall out of the bus, we grab them by the shirt and we say, okay, now go sit. And like I use this as an opportunity to train up the staff
Uh-huh.
on new skills, possibly bring in new higher margin profit offerings. We actually brought in during one of these times, we brought in a security appliance that turned out to be a very big reoccurring revenue moneymaker for us. I probably wouldn't have done that because I was being so distracted by these other clients. So I say, yes, it can be a trap if you ignore it, but if you recognize it for what it is and you're highly motivated around it, it can springboard you.
You have to be willing to answer the call. You have
Yep.
to be able
Yep.
to. And I want to pretend because I'm not as strong at answering the call sometimes that everyone's not great at answering the call. You are, and so thus I want to pretend you're very unique. That doesn't have to be true at all. You know, Gary, I'd love your thoughts on this because you get some front row seats to shows that I don't.
You know, I think
He wants to use me as an example, so effing bad right now.
yeah, I think I said something like the other day when we were talking about something. I said, are these decisions rooted in math? And you said, yeah, no, of course they are. Like, when I go out and try to get a new contract for Bering McKinley, it's like, I'm making sure the gross profit makes sense and all this stuff. And sometimes I question um whether or not you believe that. And like as a business owner, I also question that. It's like, am I really thinking about, like, is this profitable, or am I thinking about, like, I'm adding 5 grand to the top line,
Uh-huh.
and we'll figure it out, you know
Uh-huh.
it's like, because it's so complicated, right? It's like, okay, how many hours are they going to take to do the support for these people? Like, they're trying to introduce all these, like, half users that only use email and on the network, and so it's like, now that's confusing. So unfortunately, it's just not straightforward on, like, what's going to happen when we go and onboard a new customer.
Uh-huh.
um, but when we root it in real math, where we say, "Hey, look, this is the price that we need to charge because we expect them to show up and ask for this amount of services," right? Especially when we're dealing with these, like, all-inclusive contracts, and we're chasing this agreement gross profit, right? So meaning, like, we charge X, we do a certain amount of hours against X. That's kind of where we're coming to our EHR. We're trying to get $200 an hour. We're trying to get 65% agreement gross profit. If we don't say all that and we don't do all the math around that, and then we don't also assume that, like, that is going to take an additional resource that's going to then affect more profit, like, we're not really doing our due diligence here, right? We're just looking at this one new client as, oh, this is beneficial because it adds to that top line, you know?
Right.
And this is the hard part of business ownership, is really staying disciplined to kind of that process, right? Really believing that your numbers are accurate, trusting that what you're doing is the right way, and then assessing it based on, every month, based on the financials and the math that's involved with that. I just It's very complex. So I feel for the business owners that are struggling when things aren't making sense. What I
Mhm.
can say is, if you can get standardized on some of this stuff, if you can standardize against these metrics, if you can get standardized on your pricing, if you can get standardized on how you pay people,
Mhm.
you can now forecast in the decisions you make of, like, is this the right client, actually is the right client, because you're disciplined in what you're doing on the other side of the business. You're not creating a special deal to pay someone. Oh, they're really good, they need this special situation. We'll just pay them we'll pay them 10 grand a month, even if they don't you know, we're not going to worry about their utilization. We'll just pay them. Then you broke the system on the other end. Yeah. So it's like you got to stay disciplined with these numbers for them to actually make sense.
So with that discipline, when I present this exact scenario, I feel like we would all handle it a little bit differently. But let's see if I'm right or wrong. I've got low margin agreements representing a healthy amount of revenue that would impact my need for that same number of staff. And if I look at my utilization, we're not pegged out, maybe we're in the 60% range. When I get to that moment of, okay, I'm going to let that client go, the next day, what do I do with the technicians that I'm freeing up enough meaningful time that it challenges the notion that I still need them from today's needs? Gary, what's the Boyle method of handling that? 'Cause I think we know the Ryan method, and I think it's good if you have the sauce to pull it off.
So they're already underutilized before we let go of
You're
this
already
contract.
yeah, the team is already underutilized. Not
Yeah.
massively, 10 points, 15 points, not nothing.
Yeah. And well, so the question really is, does more utilization drive revenue? Right. So if we have all of our contracts at this fixed bid, all you can eat kind of scenario where more hours doesn't create more revenue,
All right.
you're not solving the problem. If you've created the ability for you to generate revenue outside of the agreements, right? So you're not including projects and out of scope items. Um, I have not met an MSP that doesn't have additional projects that haven't been completed, a
Right.
backlog of project work. And often what happens is support kind of takes over that time. So shifting, people into that, available project work that is billable, is one technique that I think is valid. And I think fairly obvious if you looked at it. But let's just say you don't have that work either. I mean, you're just kind of getting to the point where it's like, you either have a good sales engine that can backfill the time at the right price and the right profitability, or you don't. And if you don't, writing's on the wall.
All right.
Mhm.
All right. And that's the tough moment. So when I think of this particular client, because, our point of contact, very empathetic, nice guy, all the wonderful attributes. Um, he could fall in the trap of fooling himself that the sales engine velocity can, fill in enough to not have to let people go. But I think once we push on that, he's going to find that no, the velocity isn't enough to make a meaningful difference on the P&L in a meaningful quarter. So Ryan, let me ask you this. You have confidence. I've observed it myself. You're gonna backfill. You're gonna get that work in.
I'm gonna sure try, but I also wanna say I'm not 100% in that camp,
Mm,
okay? I would say I'm a solid 75% in that camp, and I could also see myself being strategic about this, and if I have underperformers on my team, boy, wouldn't this be an opportunity
mhm.
to show the rest of the team that I value. I'm wording this very carefully, that I value their contributions as high performers, and I'm doing my job, not only trimming our underperforming contracts, but our underperforming technicians or staff.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, fair for sure. It's yeah, that it is, and it all sounds so ruthless and cold,
Uh,
but
yeah,
it's this is we're all grown ups here. It's yeah, if you're not performing as a technician and you see that we're trimming some revenue, you
mhm,
should not be surprised at what happens next.
right.
Right. Interesting. Well, this is fun. This is a real situation. Faced it, dozens of times. Watching this particular company go through it, I was real proud of them that they We had the conversation with the leadership team, and everyone's heads were nodding that this is the right direction. Classic Josh, I softened it and said, well, but let's make sure operationally we're doing everything we can. It's like they're 40% gross profit. That's not the answer. So I was proud of them for just kind of recognizing. And then our point of contact called me later and, dug in a little deeper. Now, just for the real punchline here, and if you're watching this and this story sounds familiar, and you think I'm talking about you, I'm talking about you, and I'm talking about you because I love you. Okay, so no surprises here. I might even call you and let you know we talked about you. The real punchline here is after hours he calls me, and I love this because I'm like, this is me, like I'm talking to myself. This is how awesomely, relatable this was. He's like, hey man, I know we're about to do this thing with the agreements, and I'm on board, but we've got this new deal that they set our prices too high. And I know. And now we both laughed. And I said, listen, human to human, I get it. Right. I understand and take the deal. Just who cares? Right. Like human to human. As your consultant, the fact is, fix it. Get the price where it needs to be. Trim it out. Establish their budget a little tighter. Offer the service they can afford, not the service that you want to sell them. Figure out another way, right? Because you're just going to repeat the problem. The problem doesn't go away. You're about to clean up one to replace it with another. But like that's how twisted our brains can get in this business, right? And I'll say very specifically in this managed services model. You
Mhm.
wanna make the whole freaking problem go away? Do monitoring plus selling time, right?
Yeah.
Just bill for the time they use. You're gonna be in great shape. We see it work all the time, but I think that ego is what gets us trapped in this recurring revenue. We hear this drum beat constantly, and I'm about to go on a tirade. I'll stop myself, but of saying, managed service is good, hourly is bad. It's like, well, if you can relate to this story, this moment, this conversation we're having, then challenge that notion that hourly is bad and managed services is good.
I don't think that's even a MSP problem per se, right? I think in general it's just a business problem,
Yeah.
and I think we want to be creative, right? Like the customer, we're playing this game with the customer or the prospect. It's like they kind of want things in their way and how it benefits them, and we got to kind of root it in what we need, and so there's this kind of dance that we play, and the more creative you are as the salesperson, the deeper and deeper waters you get yourself into. And it's like, oh yeah, like yeah, that'll work because if they pay us this way, then we'll get all this extra stuff on the back end of the deal, and it'll work out. We don't need to capture it all today, and you start to make things up in your head. Um, and when it's not principal led sales, it's just sales people, that stuff never gets checked on, right? They don't go back to their deals 6 months ago and say, hey, did that ever work out the way I thought it was going to be? They got their spiff and they're on to the next one, right?
That's
When it's
right.
principal led sales, it's a different story, right? When you're trying to protect your P&L and L and your balance sheet and making sure that you got enough money to run the business, and then you're out there doing stuff in deep waters. It's like, you know, and I know Josh and I go through this all the time where I'm like, hey, does that ever materialize? And the answer is typically no. It's like, no, they got it on us. Like they got what they wanted. We didn't get what we wanted. Now we're stuck with this thing that doesn't really make sense, right? Um, so that discipline is very important to kind of stick to, and I think that's what keeps you out of trouble. But man, yeah, that message that you just said about him calling you, I mean, I think someone called me last night with the same message.
Well, not me, but yes.
Some guy, I don't know.
That is funny. That is true. That is true. Yes. No, it's the thing, man. And if we kind of take this out to, a broader, larger version, it's you're excited that you hit $2 million in revenue, and we're excited for you and with you. If your
Mhm.
profit sucks, you got to remember that adage of, what is it? Revenues for show, profits for dough, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. Like, it's right there. It's been said a billion times. You've heard it at least once in your life. But when we're at that 2 million and we're not profitable, you're not going to sell your way out of it. That's fact one. And, fact two is you can change that. Be a $1.5 million company with
Mhm.
20% net profit. Isn't that way more interesting than being a 2 million at 7%? Like that has to ring true for you, or
Yeah.
you just fight this battle way too long.
Well, and I always thought that, like, I just grew this little MSP in Montana, and I other than you, Josh, I didn't really know anybody else in the industry. I didn't pick up a lot of things. I just did it the way that we talked about and the way I thought was right. And I remember going to a peer group and sitting down for one of the first times. And I sat down next to a company that had a $6 million MSP. And I was like, "Ooh, look at you guys. You're like," I was in awe. I was at about 2 million at the
Yeah,
time. And I was just like, I'm sitting at the table with the big boys.
that's right.
And then what I didn't realize is none of them were making any money.
Nope. I remember that moment. Yeah.
And I was sitting in that room and I looked around and I'm like, I'm making more money than anybody at this table.
Uh-huh.
And I'm the smallest. I'm like, what are you guys doing?
Right.
And the next amazing moment was one of the best things, Josh, I think you ever told me was about charging for shipping, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
just this little tiny nugget,
Classic.
right?
Yeah.
But it's a very profitable little nugget because we hardly ever pay for shipping. It's
Right.
free,
Right.
right? And so I remember going back that next, like 6 months later, however long we met, and everybody was showing their shipping number. And
Yeah.
they were like, look, you have this $6 million MSP that's excited about 10 grand in shipping,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
But
That's
no, it's tough for all those business owners out there. You've been listening to us talk about this, but when it's Sally, right? And
Mhm.
Sally owns this company, and you've worked with Sally forever. And you might even know a little bit about Sally's going through divorce or Sally's company's not doing real good, right? Like the human aspect plays into this a lot more than we sometimes give it credit for. But at the end of the day, you have a bunch of human support you're supporting, right? Your team, your techs, your family, and charging the right amount is the right thing to do at the end of the day for everybody.
Amen. Amen. Well, good deal, guys. This was I told you this is gonna be a fun one. I think it's a fun one. I think it's very relatable to everyone. Leave a comment, let us know your story. Give us a call. Now, listen, if you're not spending, 10, 15 hours a year analyzing your managed services portfolio, you're probably leaving profit and dollars on the table. Give us a call. We'll walk through it with you. We love talking about these things, but with that, we'll say goodbye. All right. Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
We're good. Bye.
Bye.